Welcome back, Crime Scene 24/7 family. And to all new viewers, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss a case we break wide open. At dawn on September 30th, 2025, a regiment of forest guards set out on patrol in Okiode, Kwara State. They walked quietly through the undergrowth, their radios scanning for signs of illegal logging or poachers. But as the sun broke over the horizon, gunshots erupted from the darkness. 12 brave forest protectors fell, riddled with bullets. 4 others survived. Authorities called the attack audacious. Many wondered, who dared lash out at those who protect the land? But inside police logs and crime scene reports lay messages, footprints, and a weapon style that linked this massacre to earlier raids. And what the investigators uncovered next would expose how deep danger runs in those forests. It was just after 6:15 a.m. on September 30th, 2025, when 2 pickup trucks carrying members of the Kwara State Forestry Commission rumbled slowly down a dirt road on the edge of Okiode Forest Reserve. Their mission was routine, part of a weekly patrol aimed at stopping illegal logging and hunting operations deep in the woodland. Most of the 16 men had done this countless times. None expected the horror that awaited them. As they approached a narrow bend known locally as the Red Path, the convoy slowed. Then, without warning, a volley of automatic gunfire shattered the morning calm. Bullets ripped through the vehicles from multiple directions. Within seconds, the forest patrol was pinned down. "We didn't even see them," one survivor later told investigators. "The shots came from everywhere. It felt like an ambush we had no way out of." By the time the shooting stopped, 12 forest guards lay dead, some still clutching their radios. 4 others, bleeding, disoriented but alive, were pulled to safety by local hunters who heard the chaos from miles away. Emergency calls flooded the Kwara State Police Command. Shots fired in Okiode, officers down, multiple casualties, one dispatcher reported. Tactical units were scrambled, and by 7 a.m. police and military units had sealed off the area. Witnesses described scenes of pure devastation. Patrol trucks riddled with bullet holes, equipment scattered across the dirt road, and the unmistakable signs of a coordinated, well-planned assault. Shell casings from at least 3 different rifles, footprints vanishing into the trees, and tire marks leading deeper into the reserve. Grief rippled through the nearby community. Families rushed to the scene, many collapsing in tears as bodies were pulled from the forest floor. At the Kwara State Specialist Hospital, morgues overflowed with the victims, men who had spent their lives protecting Nigeria's disappearing woodlands. "It wasn't just an attack," said Commissioner for Environment, Remilekun Banigbe, speaking hours later. "It was a declaration of war against the people protecting our natural heritage." But when investigators recovered one of the rifles left behind at the scene, they realized it didn't match anything used by local poachers, and that single detail would blow the investigation wide open. Within hours of the ambush, the Okiode Forest Reserve was transformed into a sprawling crime scene. Dozens of officers from the Kwara State Police Command, detectives from the Federal Criminal Investigation Department, FCID, and even operatives from the Department of State Services, DSS, were on the ground. Their mission: track down the killers before they vanished into the dense wilderness. Investigators began by combing the ambush site inch by inch. They collected more than 140 shell casings, most of them from AK-47 and G3 rifles, standard weapons for bandits and illegal loggers. But one weapon stood out. A Czech-made CZ Bren 2 assault rifle, not commonly seen in civilian hands, was found partially buried near a tree line. Ballistics later confirmed it was used in the attack, and its serial number had been filed off, a clear sign of professional involvement. Surveillance footage from nearby logging routes painted a chilling picture. About 90 minutes before the shooting, 2 unidentified vehicles, a dark gray Hilux and a beige Land Cruiser, were seen entering the reserve from an unmonitored path. Neither vehicle was registered to any forestry unit or government agency. Investigators believed they belonged to the attackers. Then came the most critical breakthrough. One of the 4 surviving guards, 36-year-old Abdul Rashid Olamilekan, gave a detailed eyewitness statement from his hospital bed. "They weren't poachers," he said. They were trained. They moved in formation. They communicated with hand signals. This wasn't about wood. The testimony shifted the focus of the investigation. The working theory was no longer a random poaching attack. It was now considered a coordinated assault by an organized armed group. Intelligence gathered by the DSS soon linked the assault to a notorious network of armed forest cartels operating across southwestern Nigeria, known for trafficking timber, weapons, and in some cases, people. As detectives traced the abandoned rifle, a surprising connection emerged. The same weapon model had been seized 2 years earlier in an arms bust tied to the Igbomina network, a violent militia suspected of financing itself through illegal deforestation and black market logging. If true, the ambush might have been more than revenge. It could have been a message. But investigators weren't prepared for what they would find next: a blood-stained map hidden beneath one of the patrol vehicles. And on that map was a single name circled in red, a name that would lead them straight to the suspected mastermind. The blood-stained map recovered from the scene became the turning point in the investigation. At the center of that map was one name: Alhaji Sulaiman Baba Timber Adetayo, a 54-year-old businessman with a long and controversial history in Nigeria's illegal logging underworld. For years, Adetayo had built a timber empire stretching from Kwara to Oyo State, and according to intelligence files, he was no stranger to violence. Court records reveal that in 2019, Adetayo was briefly detained on suspicion of ordering an attack on rival loggers in the Ogbomosho forest belt, where 3 people were killed. He was released due to insufficient evidence. Since then, authorities believe he had been operating in the shadows, using shell companies and paid militias to control forest access and intimidate government officers. Surveillance footage and intercepted phone data placed Adetayo's convoy less than 12 kilometers from the ambush site on the morning of the attack. Investigators also uncovered encrypted chat logs, suggesting a planned operation referred to as Operation Smoke Out, believed to be a coded reference to removing government patrols from the reserve. Witness testimony added another layer. A former associate, speaking on condition of anonymity, told investigators he warned them not to interfere with his logging routes. He said if they did, people would die. This testimony aligned with a series of threats received by the Kwara Forestry Task Force just 2 weeks before the killings. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence came from digital forensics. One of the mobile phones recovered from the ambush site was linked to an encrypted messaging group used by known members of the Igbomina network. Inside were photos of the Forest Guard's patrol routes, internal memos from the Forestry Commission, and a chilling voice note allegedly from Adetayo himself saying, "By the end of the month, the forest will belong to us again." The mounting evidence pointed to a clear motive: retaliation and dominance. The guards were not targeted randomly. Their deaths were a brutal message to the authorities, and to anyone who dared challenge a multi-million naira criminal enterprise built on Nigeria's disappearing forests. Yet, one question remained unanswered. If Adetayo was truly behind the massacre, how had he managed to evade capture for so long? As it turned out, the answer lay far beyond Nigeria's borders. Investigators discovered that his network wasn't just supplying illegal timber. It was part of a cross-border smuggling pipeline linked to arms trafficking routes stretching into Benin and Burkina Faso. But before authorities could move in and arrest him, Adetayo vanished. His phones went dark. His businesses shut down overnight. And then, just days later, a grainy CCTV image surfaced. A man resembling Baba Timber boarding a private jet in Cotonou, heading for an undisclosed destination. The manhunt was now international. The aftermath of the September 30th forest massacre sent shockwaves far beyond the borders of Kwara State. Within hours, Nigeria's national news outlets ran non-stop coverage of the attack, calling it the deadliest assault on environmental officers in the country's history. The faces of the 12 slain guards, once known only to their families and local communities, became symbols of a much larger war. One pitting state authority against a rising tide of organized criminal networks. Candlelight vigils swept through Ilorin, Lagos, and Abuja. In an emotional address, Forestry Commissioner Dr. Halima Olayemi broke down in tears as she read the names of the victims aloud. They were fathers, brothers, sons. All they wanted was to protect our land. Protesters marched to the state assembly demanding swift justice and tougher enforcement of environmental laws. Placards read, "Our forests, our future, and no tree is worth a life." But the killings didn't just ignite grief, they sparked outrage. Opposition leaders accused the government of ignoring repeated warnings about armed groups infiltrating forest reserves. A leaked internal memo from June 2025 revealed that officials had flagged the rise of heavily armed timber syndicates months before the massacre. But budget cuts and political infighting stalled any significant action. International reaction was swift. The United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, issued a statement condemning the attack and urging Nigeria to classify illegal logging-linked violence as a form of organized crime. The Interpol West Africa Task Force offered support, citing intelligence that the weapons used in the ambush might have been trafficked from Mali's conflict zones. Then came the FBI. Working with Nigerian authorities, they confirmed that encrypted communications tied to the attackers had been traced back to foreign IP addresses in Turkey and the UAE, suggesting that the syndicate's reach extended beyond Africa. That revelation fueled conspiracy theories online. Some claimed that foreign cartels were bankrolling local logging militias to control the flow of rare hardwoods into global black markets. Families of the slain guards demanded accountability. At a packed press conference, Aisha Ibrahim, widow of lead ranger Yusuf Ibrahim, tearfully asked, "If they knew these men were dangerous, why did they send my husband into the forest without backup?" Her words echoed nationwide, sparking a parliamentary inquiry into alleged negligence by the Federal Forestry Service. The political temperature soared. Lawmakers clashed over proposed anti-logging legislation, while security analysts warned that Nigeria's environmental agencies were woefully unequipped to face criminal groups now operating with military-grade firepower. And just as it seemed the story couldn't grow more complex, it did. 10 days after the attack, Interpol released a statement confirming that the Igbamina network had been linked to at least 7 assassinations of forestry officials across West Africa in the past 3 years, and that the massacre in Kwara was part of a larger campaign to destabilize environmental enforcement. But as investigators closed in on the smuggling network, they uncovered something even more disturbing. A series of bank transactions tying a prominent government official to the same accounts funding the ambush. Suddenly, this was no longer just a manhunt. It was a corruption scandal at the highest levels. What investigators found next turned a violent ambush into a national reckoning. While combing through encrypted chats and dark web forums used by the Igbamina network, a cyber forensics unit with the EFCC, Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, uncovered a series of large international wire transfers. The sender? A shell company registered in Dubai, with links to a Nigerian logistics firm that, on paper, supplied timber export permits. But buried beneath the corporate jargon was a shocking discovery. One of the company's silent partners was Honor Musa Adedayo, a sitting member of the National Assembly and chairman of the Forestry Oversight Committee. Bank records showed over N312 million had been funneled into accounts connected to the very cartel suspected of orchestrating the Forest Guards massacre. The revelation blew the case wide open. At a tense press conference, an EFCC spokesperson said, "This investigation is no longer limited to the gunmen. We are now pursuing financial sponsors and political collaborators." In private, one investigator told reporters, "This wasn't just an illegal logging dispute. It was a coordinated campaign, backed by people with power and influence." Digital analysts traced encrypted messages sent days before the ambush to an IP address inside the National Assembly complex itself. One message read, "The patrol must be stopped before the inspection date." That inspection, scheduled for October 3rd, was expected to expose a multi-billion naira timber smuggling ring operating under government contracts. International agencies took notice. Interpol issued arrest warrants for 2 Turkish nationals believed to have supplied the weapons used in the attack. Meanwhile, Europol flagged suspicious shipments of rare West African hardwoods leaving the port of Rotterdam, allegedly linked to the same Dubai shell company. As the pieces fell into place, a disturbing picture emerged. The murder of 12 unarmed forest guards was not a random act of violence. It was a targeted assassination designed to silence enforcement officers who were getting too close to exposing a global smuggling operation worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And if that weren't enough, one final twist remained. On October 10th, federal investigators executed a search warrant on a warehouse outside Ilorin. Inside, they found military-grade weapons, encrypted laptops, and a list of more than 30 forestry officers marked as future targets. The massacre, they realized, had been only the beginning. And as news of the hit list spread, one chilling question echoed through Nigeria's security agencies. If the men who pulled the triggers were already dead or arrested, who was still orchestrating the killings from the shadows? In the weeks that followed, the massacre of the 12 forest guards became more than just a headline. It became a national reckoning. Candlelight vigils were held in Ilorin, Lokoja, and Abuja, with families holding photos of their loved ones and demanding justice. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu ordered a federal inquiry into the operations of the Forestry Commission and directed the Department of State Services, DSS, to investigate possible government collusion. The incident sparked outrage across Nigeria. Civil society groups accused the government of deliberate negligence, while environmental activists warned that the killings were part of a larger campaign to silence those fighting against illegal logging, an industry estimated to be worth over $500 billion annually. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForTheForest12 trended for weeks, with citizens calling for the resignation of top officials tied to the scandal. International reaction was just as swift. The United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, condemned the attack, describing it as an act of environmental terrorism, while the Interpol Environmental Crime Unit dispatched experts to assist Nigerian authorities. In a rare joint statement, Europol and FBI cybercrime divisions pledged cooperation in tracing the offshore financial networks linked to the killings. But even as arrests were made and accounts frozen, troubling questions remained unanswered. Who had funded the weapons shipment? Why were certain names on the hit list redacted from public records? And most chilling of all, how deep did the corruption run? Investigators continued to follow leads across Dubai, Turkey, and the Netherlands, convinced that the killings were part of a far more extensive criminal network that transcended borders. A senior DSS official, speaking anonymously, told journalists, "We believe this cartel has operatives embedded within government agencies. This wasn't just about timber. This was about power." For the families of the slain forest guards, however, the politics and conspiracies meant little. They wanted justice, they wanted answers, and they wanted to ensure that no other family would ever receive the call they did that September morning. On the day of the final memorial service, the daughter of Officer Bamidele Ojo, one of the victims, stood before a silent crowd and said, "My father died protecting the trees, but now it's our turn to protect the truth." Her words echoed across the plaza, a painful reminder that this tragedy wasn't just a story about death. It was a story about courage, sacrifice, and the high price of speaking truth to power. The massacre of the 12 forest guards was more than a violent act. It was a message to those who dare to stand against corruption, greed, and criminal power. But it also ignited something the killers never anticipated, a global movement demanding accountability. And as the investigation expands beyond Nigeria's borders, one haunting question lingers. Was this a single act of brutality, or the opening chapter of a much larger war for control of the world's disappearing forests? 12 brave forest guards lost their lives protecting what many take for granted, our land, our future. But their story isn't over. Investigators believe key players behind the massacre are still out there, hiding in plain sight. Do you think this was a simple act of violence, or part of a much larger criminal network? Share your theory in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want more real investigations like this, hit subscribe to Crime Scene 24/7 because here, the truth never sleeps.